May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. In last week's gospel, Jesus was found sleeping in the midst of a storm. When he was awakened, he asked the frightened disciples, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" In today's gospel, Jesus tells the anxious synagogue ruler, "Do not fear, only believe." It seems like the pendulum swing between faith and fear is common to us all. You can't have lived through the last 18 months without having a sense of anxiety. When everything is turned upside down and life changes and things seem uncertain, of course, anxiety is an undercurrent in our lives. But faith and fear, it seems like our life is a mixture of both. We want to believe, we want to have a sure foundation upon which we can stand, but that undercurrent of fear nags us. And so how do we navigate these rough waters in our lives? I think we're given our gospel stories to help guide us, because we have two individuals today who showed us how to exercise faith in the midst of the most formidable adversity you could possibly imagine. Having a child 12 years old at the point of death is devastating. And then to hear that the child has died, I can't imagine anything more traumatic. And yet, Jesus says, "Fear not, only believe." So how do we get there? We in the Episcopal Church struggle with this thing called faith because we want to have a balance between faith and human reason. But sometimes they don't quite fit, to be honest with you. There's times in my walk with God where it seems like doubt comes at me like a machine gun with thoughts in my brain. And I have to, the only resource that I have is to say, it's with the heart you believe. And so I have to say at those times, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Help me to keep faith in the arena of my heart." Because if I try to keep it in the arena of my mind, it doesn't quite work or fit. Now, faith is reasonable. And we have good reason to believe. But when it comes right down to exercising it, we've got to realize it comes from the heart. So let's look at these two people who exercised faith and see what it looks like, because we can learn from them what it means to exercise faith. All right, as I said before, this synagogue ruler was totally desperate. And so he comes to Jesus and pleads with him. "My little daughter's at the point of death. Come, lay your hand on her, and that she may be made well and live." Here's a man who is willing to venture beyond the comforts of a domesticated religious system of rules to a radical openness beyond anything he's ever known. He moves from being what could be considered a cautious, culture-pleasing religious person who knows all the right procedures and all the right rules to being a radical risk-taker in search of the power of the kingdom of heaven manifested in this person, Jesus. I can relate to that. But being a religious person who wears these garbs, of course. I want to be respectable, even culture-pleasing. But sometimes faith says I've got to go beyond my human reason. And I've got to reach out to say, "Jesus, you've got to help me. I'm in over my head." Jairus could easily have given up hope, thrown in the towel, shaken his fist at heaven, and passively opted for what will be, will be. But he doesn't. Instead, out of love. And that's what motivated him. It was love that was working through faith. He loved his daughter, and he wasn't going to give up. He was going to lay aside every garb of pride that he had. He didn't care what he looked like. He didn't care what others thought. He just knew, I need to get help. And I'm going to go to the one person I know who gives me the only hope for help. His daughter was at the point of death. And he needed a breakthrough from heaven. And he got it. Barbara Brown Taylor, who's an Episcopal priest and a best-selling author, describes faith in the following way. I like what she says. Faith is not a well-fluffed nest or a well-defined castle high on a hill. It's more like a rope bridge over a scenic gorge, sturdy, but swings back and forth with precious little to hang on to except stories you've heard. That is the best and only way across. But if Jesus was who he said he was, the bridge will hold. Believing in him will not put us in charge or even save us from all harm. But by believing in him, we may gradually lose our fear. And I would say, fear is always there somewhere. We've got to somehow deal with it. But faith helps us to deal with it. Therefore, the faith that Jairus exercised is one where he not only came to Jesus, he followed Jesus. Even when it seemed like all hope was lost. People came from his home and said, your daughter's dead, why bother him any further? So, sometimes faith is hoping against hope. Sometimes it moves against reason. It didn't make any sense. Why should you bother Jesus any further? But you know what he did? He said, he just hung in there with Jesus regardless of the circumstances. And I think that's what we do sometimes. Sometimes we say we don't have answers to every question that comes into our minds, why bad things happen or whatever. But we hang in there. And so his faith, as it turns out, meant walking with Jesus. All right, I'm hanging with you. You know, come what may. And Lord, when it comes right down to it, in my own life, I've had to say, Lord, surprise me. I can't figure out what you're going to do or how you're going to fix this, but just surprise me. I'm just know one thing. I'm hanging in there with you. And I'm going to take a second. Think about this other woman, too. Suffering from a hemorrhage. Now, a hemorrhage is a bleeding condition. In other words, she was being drained of energy and strength and human vitality. Now, come on, admit it. There are things that drain us too. There are things where sometimes I look at the church and says, it seems like it's just bleeding to death. Lord, what are we going to do? You know, we have things in our life that says, oh man, it seems like I'm being bled out by this. And it's, you know, and she had tried everything. She had done everything money could buy. She's seen countless doctors, and it had only grown worse, but something in her still hopes. Despite all she'd been through, something in her believes, trusts, and even expects that if she simply reaches out and touches the edge of Jesus' cloak, she will be healed. She doesn't approach Jesus with the intention of falling before him and even speaking to him. Now, let me just add a little bit about that. Having an issue of blood in the Old Testament faith, rendered you unclean. You weren't supposed to even go into a synagogue or a temple to worship. You weren't supposed to touch other people, get near other people, because you might make them unclean if you did. So she thought, I'm going to do this secretly. This is going to be my private experience of faith. I'm just going to come in behind him and I'll see if I can just touch the hem of his garment. That shouldn't bother anybody. But she had faith, if I just touch him, I'll be made well. So she comes up behind him, reaches for his hem, and as soon as she touches the hem of his garment, she's healed. Now Jesus, knowing what had happened, looked around, The densely packed crowd asking who touched me. The disciples are befuddled and Jairus is likely impatient, but Jesus is insistent. Who touched me? Whether out of self-conscious or out of sheer awe at what just happened, the woman steps forward and shares her story with Jesus in front of the crowd. And I like what it says there. It says she told him in front of everybody the whole story, the whole truth. There's something about telling the whole truth where there's a breakthrough. Now, you've seen it in romance novels and in popular movies where a couple is trying to get together, trying to get it off the ground, and yet there's this secret that's hanging over one or both of them where they just can't come clean about it. But, and so it builds tension, it builds drama, and then finally, after humbling circumstances of all sorts, the truth comes out whether they like it or not. And they've got to face what are they going to do with it. And hoping against hope, love breaks through. Thrills our hearts and we're excited. Something of that dynamic is happening in this gospel. Love is breaking through when the whole truth is known. And then Jesus says to her, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace. I think part of her faith was admitting the whole truth and coming clean about it. She knew she wasn't acceptable. She knew what the Old Testament law said. I'm unclean. I don't want everybody knowing about my issue, what's going on with me. But when she came clean, in faith, she was made whole. All right, the same things happened in my own life. Ellen and I tried to date each other. My mom tried to fix us up. And I just couldn't come clean with her about my feelings. I had affections for her, but I was hiding them because I was thinking that. At first I thought, she was someone who led worship in front of 200 people, cool, calm, and collected. What did she want to do with me? Little did I know that she liked me. But she wouldn't let me know either. So we played these games with each other. It lasted for over a year until finally, I even wrote her a Dear John letter and said, God couldn't be in this. I actually did that. I was so frustrated. Finally, my brother said, you two, come on, let's just be friends. And come on, you just have dinner with us, because he was dating Ellen's roommate. They have us over, and I finally just come clean with Ellen. I said, I want you to know I have tried not to like you. I've really, really tried, but I can't help myself. I really like you. In fact, I think I love you. Then I really shocked the pants off of her. I said, I want to kiss you. Oh my God, she was like, she couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe it. Needless to say, we broke the ice and things got going. Something happens in faith that breaks the ice, that breaks barriers, that breaks those things that hinder us from finding and experiencing that connection with God that brings wholeness, that brings peace, that brings love and joy. And when it happened, you know what Jesus said? He called her daughter. Your faith has made you whole, has made you well. Daughter, he claimed her as his own. He claimed her as, regardless of what issue she had, regardless of things that even the Old Testament law said that makes you unclean, his love broke that barrier, accepted her, embraced her, and she found a wholeness as a result of it. Wow. And he said, your faith has made you well. Now, that's true for us. Now, think about it for a minute. Don't we all have issues in our life where we say, I know, Lord, if you know the whole truth about me, you know there's some things I think are unacceptable. I don't know how in the world you can accept me. And yet, our faith makes us well, makes us whole. And it's always a surprise. We admit this kind of stuff even in our liturgy. Do you know that? In the Rite One liturgy, called the Prayer of Humble Access, we say things like this: we do not presume to come to this thy table, O merciful Lord, trusting in our own righteousness, but in thy manifold and great mercies. We're not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs under your table, but thou art the same Lord whose property is always to have mercy. This mercy is something we all long to receive. It's received by faith. And so this is what we exercise. And there's something about telling the whole truth that gets to that. And that's why we have in our church, in our liturgy, a confession of sin. Lord, I admit I'm not done what I should do, and all, I've left undone those things I ought to have done, all that stuff. We bring all that baggage, all that stuff that makes us, quote, unclean, and we lay it at the feet of Jesus, and we find ourselves being embraced, loved, and accepted. That's the gospel story. And so it's something that we need to exercise. I just heard about a church this week who had, oh my gosh, they had baggage galore, in their history. They had a minister who blew it out of the water so bad, you know what I mean? When the truth came out, he couldn't even accept himself. Anyway, the story goes on and gets worse and worse and worse. And the church was just devastated. And you know what the church decided to do? The only way we can get through this healing is to get before the congregation, have the people come forward and tell them the whole truth, as embarrassing as it is. And you know something? People found a grace to forgive, to understand, and get through it together. Somehow we need to embrace each other. So what this means is, even though this is a story about individuals who exercise faith, there's something about us doing this together. For we as a church are a community that embraces people who feel broken, who feel like life circumstances have overwhelmed me, and I haven't always responded the right way. This past week at the clergy conference, had time to meet with all kinds of people. I just go wild at these things. I just love it so much. One priest afterwards just began sharing with me, and he said, man, I have blown it in my life so bad. I'm now in my third marriage. But he said, God has just been so gracious. It just blows my mind how good God's been to me in spite of the fact that I know I've been unworthy. Amazing. And he's in this diocese and he's producing fruit, and it's exciting. That's God's grace. That's God's goodness. And so we have in our scriptures, in other places, we have, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. He is faithful. He is merciful. So let's take hold of that hope that's set before us and be claimed as God's sons and daughters, knowing that He has made us acceptable. He has embraced us and adopted us, and that we can now go forth in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. I'm going to leave you with two questions to think about. In what ways do you see yourself pushing against circumstances in order to express faith in Jesus? Think about that. We all have to press against some circumstances. And the woman with the hemorrhage did not let her sickness define her, but reached out in spite of what others would think. Jesus affirmed her faith by claiming her as daughter, a child of God. How is God calling you to claim your identity as a child of God? Think about that. And then go in peace. Amen.